Thanks, Sydney. Thank you so much for inviting us here. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Georgia Quinn. I'm a securities attorney. I know you've seen a lot of them today. But don't hold it against me. I'm really a nice person. I also started a legal technology company about 3 years ago called iDisclose, and we automate the filing of legal documents with the SEC for small capital raises. So when doing a Regulation CF crowdfunding offering, you have to file a Form C with the SEC. So we have a system that's very similar to TurboTax, where you go online, you fill out a questionnaire about your company, and it creates the document, and from your desktop you can just file it immediately with the SEC. You don't have to go through a third-party service provider. And we do that now for Form C, for Form D, Form CAR, several other SEC filings. So what I'm here to talk to you about today, however, are the legal ramifications around Title III crowdfunding, which I don't think anybody is here to talk about, and ICOs. And I am going to bore you with Title III crowdfunding first, but I want you to remember that whenever we talk about Title III crowdfunding, Regulation CF, it's also called, this is very applicable to the ICO market. So in order to access unaccredited investors, we may start to see these ICOs utilize a Regulation CF or a Regulation A or another type of offering so that they're not simply going after accredited investors and that they can bring in this different pool of capital. But we're going to start talking about Title III crowdfunding. So just some of the legal considerations, and these are kind of in no specific order. And really what I'd like to do is kind of run through the topics that I have, and then I'd like to open it up for questions and really have more of a dialogue, because I think that's a lot more fun and a lot more useful to the people who paid to be here. So one of the first things you need to consider, and this actually goes, when I speak, I'm going to speak as for both ICOs and for Regulation CF offerings, because first they could be one and the same, and also these are just important legal considerations. The first thing you need to think about really is the entity type. So what kind of company are you going to use to raise the funds? You are limited to certain types of entities when it comes to Regulation CF. So you can't use an SPV or otherwise known as a special purpose vehicle. A lot of times when you're conducting a raise with a lot of investors, you want to cabin them all into a special purpose vehicle so they become one line on the cap table of the company. You're not really allowed to do that in Regulation CF. People have come up with a lot of other creative solutions to get around that, voting trusts and things called safes. So there are alternatives, but that's just something to keep in mind, which then brings us to the security type. So what type of security are you actually issuing in the company? Are you selling stock? Are you issuing a note? Are you using a safe? Are you doing a rev share? All of these things have proven successful in regulation crowdfunding offerings. So it's really kind of a decision on the part of the company what best fits their business strategy and the type of company that they are and the life cycle that the company's in. For regulation crowdfunding, as you guys know, there's a cap on the amount of money that you can raise. It's $1 million in a 12-month period. So that obviously has to be a part of the equation. And as we're talking about these multi-million-dollar ICOs, it kind of seems a little irrelevant, but it's always an option, and it might be nice to tack on $1 million worth of really loyal fans of your product. Another thing to think about is the potential for doing a side-by-side offering. So what we mean by that is when you're doing a regulation crowdfunding offering, you can simultaneously be doing a private placement or a Regulation D offering. So anytime you would get an accredited investor, you would put them in your Reg D bucket. You could raise an unlimited amount of money, and then you'd put your unaccredited investors in your Reg CF bucket, raise up to $1 million from those people. A lot of platforms are doing that and having great success. And again, just from a practical standpoint, the benefit of that would be you can still raise your unlimited amount of money, but you are also able to offer the experience and the opportunity for your customers, your fan base, your social media followers to feel like they're a part of your journey. One just side note that people, when conducting these offerings, forget is that in order to file documentation with the SEC, you have to file for their credentialing on what's called EDGAR, which is their filing system. And so these are just some little roadblocks that can come up. So just keep in mind that there are some procedural things that have to take place before you can launch an offering, file these documents. So some additional considerations, which I don't know if people have talked about this already today, but when you're launching an offering for Reg CF, you're not technically allowed to advertise, or at least, you know, it's not like a no holds barred kind of advertising that you can do. You have to think about, you know, one of two types of communications you want to make. One is a terms communication, which can list very specific things about the deal, like the amount of money that you're raising, the type of security you're offering, the minimum investment amount, and the deadline. And then there's the non-terms communication, which can go into in-depth detail about the business plan, the operations of the company, the team, and, you know, kind of the mission of the company. Other, you know, considerations to keep in mind are the additional disclosures that are required once you conduct a Regulation CF offering. So to the extent anything materially changes in the business during the course of the offering, you have to amend your public filing with the SEC. You have to provide updates in the form of this Form CU once you close your offering to make sure that you inform the SEC of how much money you raised, or at least a rough estimate. Also, you have to conduct an annual filing after you've had a successful raise. And then, of course, your financial statements will have to be attached as exhibits to all of these, and they have to be GAAP compliant, and in most cases, they have to be reviewed by a public accountant. Okay, Title III platform considerations. So in order to conduct a crowdfunding offering, you have to go through an online platform that has to be registered with the SEC and FINRA. And so some things that platforms, you know, really should be keeping in mind, and issues that have come up, are the minimum amount that companies are raising. So the way crowdfunding works is you set a minimum amount of money that your company must raise. And if you don't hit that amount, then you don't keep any of the money and your deal is unsuccessful. And so if you set a limit or a minimum of $100,000 and you raise $99,000 online by your closing date and you haven't reached your threshold, you have to give all that money back, and, you know, it's not a successful deal. So as a solution to that, what a lot of companies do is they set a very low, artificially low threshold, something that will not sustain their business, something that will not allow them to execute on their business plan. So that's a problem. So, you know, that's one of the things that the platform is working to vet through and make sure doesn't happen. Other things platforms have to keep in mind is compensation. So the way that they can receive compensation is in the form of a percentage of the amount raised. They can also take a percentage of the security that is being offered. One thing they can't do is co-invest, and that's kind of a shame, because it would be nice if the platform could, in addition to listing the companies on, you know, their platform, be able to put some of their money where their mouth is and actually co-invest and share that risk and that burden with the investors that are coming in. And then there's the closing mechanics. So one thing we're seeing in the market, which is a little disheartening, is that as companies are closing successful deals, it's taking a very long time for the platforms to actually remit proceeds to the companies. It's taken an even longer time for the platforms to remit their investor information, which has a lot of implications, not the least of which is a tax concern, where those investors actually need their K-1s or other tax documents in order to properly file their taxes, and the issuers aren't able to provide those in a timely manner. So these are just some things to kind of keep your eye on as we move forward in this very new sort of industry. Okay, so ICOs, this is why you're all here, yay. Okay, we got that out of the way. I put some very rudimentary sort of definitions up, but I'm seeing that this crowd is like, you know what you're talking about. So we're just gonna blow past that, and we're gonna get to kind of some of the fundamental legal issues and regulatory concerns about these ICOs. So ICOs, we've been talking about them. We've been talking about, are they a security? Are they not? We talked about the Howey test a little bit. Everybody here familiar with the Howey test? Okay, that was like totally, okay, all right, that's good. I'm not gonna like go back to corporate law or securities law 101. So the issue, as you know it, is, actually, I'll just take a step back. And this is kind of what the ICO market has meant to me over the past 2 to 3 years. So when I first heard about this, I thought, oh, this is a bunch of people thinking they're very clever, that if I just call it a token and not a share, that I can go and offer this, raise money for my company in a completely unregulated way to non-accredited investors. And, aren't I a genius? I must be the first person to ever think of this. And so I was just waiting for the SEC to crack down and be like, sorry, folks, this is obviously a security. You must register or, find some sort of exemption. $3 billion later, it's still happening and nobody's doing anything about it. But actually, some people have, certain agencies are now providing guidance, and it's becoming more and more clear to everyone that indeed these are securities. Indeed, you must register or find an exemption. There's a lot of new clever ways out there to structure things so that at one point in time they are a security and then they become a commodity. But regardless, there's no free money, people. So then, we get into this question, well, is it a utility token or is it a security token? And of course, the hope is that if it's this utility token, it won't be deemed a security. One problem with that is it still might be deemed a commodity. It still might be deemed a currency. So, it's like you jump out of the frying pan into the fire. But, the basic concept of the utility token is that it's more like a product, something that is useful in the provision of services by the company, and the security is really something that is just tied to the ebb and flow and success and failure of that company. So something that would be based more on the profit and loss of the company versus the actual products that the company is offering or services that the product is providing. So as we've talked, I've heard people talk about, we know that the SEC gave us guidance and said that, this is really just going to be kind of a facts and circumstances decision that they're going to be making on a case-by-case scenario, and the securities laws and you should apply them. And basically they just said, look at the law. The law is the law. And we're like, thanks for all that help. But it is good that at least we know that, the SEC is watching this, this isn't something that's falling, under the radar. And also, just generally, it is a security. I think probably the only definition more broad than the commodity would be a security. And then, of course, Cooley, a law firm, has put out their SAFT white paper. And that's what I referenced a moment ago, which is this type of security that they are proponing. And I'd love to get people's thoughts on this, and we can kind of have a discussion if anybody is interested. But this is a security that at one point in time, at issuance, is a security. And you must find an exemption or registration for it. And it's basically an investment contract to receive utility tokens at some point in the future. So at this stage, the company's just issuing these investment contracts. They haven't built anything. They don't have a network. They don't have infrastructure. They have an idea, and they have a team. And so they'll issue the white paper. They will conduct this offering. In Cooley's opinion, it is really only for accredited investors. Those investors will invest. The company will then use those proceeds, build out the network, build out the platform, create these tokens, and then at some point in the future exchange those investment contracts for these tokens, which will then be utility tokens and not securities. And then they will be freely tradable on exchanges, just as any product would. Again, Cooley makes an analogy that the tokens would be more like silver, which is a commodity and is regulated. So this is where, again, we find one loophole or one set of regulation that we're getting out of, and we just end up jumping right into another. So it's not it's not going to be easy. But I do think it's great that people are being creative and coming up with different types of instruments and just different thoughts. But so anyway, once it's converted into that token, it can then be freely exchangeable, and it is not a security according to this white paper, and can then just be bought and sold by anyone. And furthermore, the company can then issue more of those tokens at that time, and that would not be considered the issuance of securities. It would be considered the sale of a product. Okay, so just some other legal considerations that have been kind of flying around. So when I talk to people about doing an ICO, they have a lot of questions about the entity and you know, should I start a Cayman company or a Swiss company or a Seychelles company, or, you know, and I think people have this idea that if you form some sort of foreign entity or something that's regulated in a different jurisdiction, that the U.S. securities laws won't apply to you, or that, you know, U.S. laws in general won't apply to you. But anytime you're targeting U.S. citizens for their money, for their attention, for their data, U.S. laws are going to apply. So, you know, you may just be adding more complexity to your whole organization and infrastructure by trying to set up these sort of offshore entities, and it may be best to just kind of do it plain and simple Delaware C Corp. Also, a lot of people are interested in forming foundations. A lot of times they think for tax purposes, but truly like that, what they think they're getting around isn't really what's happening. And then also it can sometimes be because they think they're masking the purchase and sale of security as a donation to a foundation. And again, you know, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a security. Intermediaries. So this is a really interesting one. I've been talking to a lot of ICO advisory companies, and these companies, you know, will help find investors for you, and they will help market your deal, and they'll help you draft your white paper, all for 5% of the total amount of proceeds raised. Well, that is transaction-based compensation, and that is something that requires you to be a broker-dealer or, you know, have an investment advisor at least. You know, like there are laws and regulations around advising people on the investments that they can make, taking compensation based on the amount of money that companies raise. And so I just, you know, it was really funny because I was talking to this guy and he's like, oh yes, we definitely think these are securities. We advise all of our clients that these are securities when we take their 5% for selling their securities. And so I was like, oh, so you guys are a broker-dealer? Oh no, what is that? Why would we need to do that? And I'm like, okay, good. Well, I'm glad you at least think they're securities. And then, of course, the giant elephant in the room is the secondary markets, right? So this is why people are actually doing these ICOs. I mean, it's great to raise all of this money initially, but you're doing that because these people think they're buying a liquid investment. They think they're buying something that is fungible, that they can go out and, you know, at some point generate a profit, and they're not going to be stuck in this, like, what would otherwise just be a private company investment for some unknowable period of time. And the issue with secondary markets is, you know, it's huge, and it just has to do with what, first of all, is this a security? Is this a commodity? Again, you know, we're just playing the name game, and also who are the buyers and sellers. And it's one thing to have a secondary market where you're, again, like doing some sort of matchmaking between accredited investors. People, you know, that's been done. We've seen that. But when you're trying to create some kind of ubiquitous market for all of these different types of tokens amongst unaccredited people, there are just a host of regulations that are involved. And I think a few people have touched on them today, but, you know, I think that's, I've kind of always said this, if that is the golden egg, right? Like if you can figure that out, I think that's where there's just an insane amount of money to be made. Okay, so that's my contact information. But what I would like to do, and Sydney, I don't know what would be better. Maybe we let Woody speak, and then we can kind of, because I'd really love to talk to you guys and, you know, just go through some questions or hypos or whatever.